Good afternoon. I'm keeping a close eye on the clock and it looks like we just hit 1:03. So for those stragglers that are just getting on, I'll get started. I'm Dolly Duffy, the Executive Director of your Notre Dame Alumni Association. And I'm really thrilled to be with you today as part of the Alumni Association Affinity Group Shared Read Initiative. These groups, as many of you know, have partnered together to read and discuss the stories of the book, Black Domers. This collaborative project has been organized by so many people who've been working tirelessly since the summer to put together videos, facilitator guides, interviews, podcasts, and more in support of this really important initiative. So I want to thank everyone who's had a hand in this and for those joining us on this discussion. The last time we gathered was in honor of Veterans Day, and we were joined by my colleague, Reagan Jones, Director for Military and Veterans Affairs at Notre Dame, and two very distinguished alums, Frank Taylor, class of 70 and 74, and Don Wycliffe from the class of 69. They both explored their experiences on campus in ROTC and off campus in the military. If you missed that event, please watch the recording on Think Indy. Now today, we're going to talk about the experience of student athletes, and we invite each of you to be part of this conversation. So please share any questions on the Google form that we are sharing through the Zoom chat function right now. Submit your questions and we'll work hard to get as many of those questions answered as we can. To lead today's discussion, we're excited to have Angie Terrain, Senior Associate Athletic Director for Culture, Diversity, and Engagement as our moderator. It's a long title. And Angie, I'll let her introduce the people that are on the panel, but I'm really thrilled because I know most of these people and they're phenomenal. And you're in for a real treat today as you hear about their experiences and what they did while they're at Notre Dame and what they've done since they've left. So Angie, you've been at the university for 4 years now. That doesn't seem possible. And you've already had 3 roles in athletics, each with increasing responsibility. And for those of you who are on this call, you know that at Notre Dame, if you come in and you've got some talent, you're going to just keep getting promoted. And Angie's a perfect example of that. So Angie, can you tell us about your new role and some of the athletics initiatives such as Stand Together and Brave Voices?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dolly. I'm so excited to be here with you all. And thank you for inviting me. I just want to reiterate, you guys are in for a treat. My initial conversation with Corey and Indy and soon to be Kevin was so exciting that I don't even want to spend time talking about me because they need to get to these folks right here. But just briefly about me, the initiative or the work that I'm doing now is really just trying to be a resource for our student athletes and staff in this diversity and inclusion area, as well as social injustice. And our student athletes have really taken on the lead with regards to the initiatives that they want to see us do, which is, they want us to listen to them. They want us to amplify their voices, give them resources, help them be more involved in the local community. And so that's exactly what I'm trying to do, educate, provide programming in this area. We already had a Diversity and Inclusion Council that has been around about almost 4 years now. So now and it was more based on staff. And so now the focus is more our student athletes. As far as Brave Voices, I think Indy Jackson is the best one to tell us more about that. But if you have not gone to her podcast, you are in for a treat. So please take a listen. But I think Indy will do a much better job of explaining where that came from than I can. So thank you.
Would you like me to explain now? Sorry.
I think we'll get into it a little bit in the questions.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm ready to go whenever you're ready, Angie. You just let me know.
All right. So thanks again to Dolly and to Mary and to Leah for having us. We're so excited. But our guests today for today's discussion are Kevin Hawkins from the class of 1961 and 2017 grads Indy Jackson and Corey Robinson. We've already shared their bios in Think Indy. But I want to highlight a few things about their achievements. So Kevin, you were a former student basketball player with a psychology degree. You're a commissioner and mediation technology specialist with the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service and have served in federal government for 18 years. You are also the co-founder and the chairman of the Hawkins Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting literacy and fighting hunger for underrepresented and underserved children, pardon me. Indy was a member of the track and field team and now is a Fighting Irish Media as an associate producer. I'm so happy. I remember when Indy was interning with us, and so happy that she's back as a full-time staff and colleague with me. So very excited about that. Indy recently started the podcast Brave Voices to give student athletes a way to share their voices, and we'll dig into that. Mr. Corey Robinson played for the Fighting Irish football team from 2013 to 15. In addition, he was elected to the Notre Dame student body president for 2016-17 academic year, becoming the first ever Notre Dame football player to serve in that position. Earlier this year, Corey joined NBC Sports Group as a reporter and digital correspondent, covering a wide variety of properties across the NBC Sports portfolio on linear, digital, and social platforms. Welcome, Kevin, Corey, and Indy. Corey, the first time I saw you, I think it was during the Martin Luther King celebration with your father. And the presentation that you two did was amazing and really touching. So I think that was my second year here at Notre Dame. So I missed you when you were a student athlete here. So I'm glad.
Didn't miss much.
Yeah.
I wanted to see Kevin play, I read all the stories about that, but yeah, that was really neat being able to do that with my dad, because, I think when you talk about race, you have to look at history. And for me personally, going back to my family tree, just always hits home, because I talked to my grandpa who grew up in segregation, and talked to my dad who then, grew up around my grandparents, understanding, hey, you can actually go and break through that barrier and become whatever you want. Yeah. And then now, I'm living a life in New York, as you said, doing NBC Sports. So it's just cool to me kind of go back in history. So I love talking to my dad about that.
That's awesome. And I had a little stint in San Antonio at University of Incarnate Word, where your dad was a little bit. So
cool.
Look, yeah. All right. Enough about me and Corey. Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Wonderfully.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. All right.
Just navigating the season, as are we all.
Yes.
And I just hope that everyone is staying safe and that all of you and yours are healthy. And I'm really blessed and honored to be asked and be part of this. So thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you. All right. We're going to start with you. So you came to the university in the 70s when there were very few students of color. Your dad graduated in 59 and you grew up cheering for Notre Dame. Tell us about your transition from Los Angeles to the cold Midwest.
That was the biggest culture shock for me, was coming from the beaches and the weather of Southern California and the culture of California coming back to the Midwest. And because as an African-American student, the transition really wasn't difficult for me from a cultural standpoint, from the aspect of I grew up as we were the only Black family in a white neighborhood in Brentwood, California. We were actually the first Black family. We predate OJ from moving there. And so when I was going to Catholic school there, the only other Black children in the school were my sisters. And the first time that I went to school with a reasonable amount of Black children was when I went to high school, at Loyola High School. And then I got further into the experience with my teammates. So it was easier for me to acculturate, because I was used to being a Black face in a sea of white faces. So yeah. It was not a difficult thing, but it was much harder. Just how people looked at life and their life experiences weren't a lot the same as mine, coming from California to the Midwest. And especially in that time, it was a lot more conservative in 1977.
Were you able to talk to your father about his experience compared to yours?
Well, we had a lot of conversations, but my father, one of the things my father was wonderful about was he always encouraged me to be my own man. He said, I didn't name you Tommy Jr., I named you Kevin, because I want you to be Kevin. So I want you to find out who Kevin is, and I want you to be that person. But he had a wonderful experience here. And from a very young age, I was clad in Notre Dame gear. And there's a story I tell in my essay that really kind of was the final nail in my heart, was when we were watching the 73 game where Notre Dame won 23-14, and Eric Pennick had a dramatic 85-yard run, and they were panning the crowd, and the students were throwing toilet paper, and everybody was going crazy. And I'm jumping up and down, and I look, and my dad's crying.
Oh.
And I'm going to cry now, because he was crying, and he said, why are you crying? We scored a touchdown. We're winning the game. You should be. He said, son, it's Notre Dame. I can't explain it to you. It's in my heart. It's Notre Dame.
Wow.
And I didn't realize it until after the conclusion of my own matriculation. And I'm watching a game in the mid 80s. It was the first night game. Tim Brown, was a Heisman candidate, and they're playing the montage on CBS. I'm with a bunch of my friends. We're drinking beer, having a raucous time. And all of a sudden I'm just like, oh. And my friends are like, what the heck, Hawk? What is going on? I go, it's Notre Dame. I can't explain it to you. So,
oh, that is amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story, Kevin. Indy.
Yes.
So, yes, from my understanding, while you were growing up, you changed school a number of times. Those experiences have helped you refine the skills of coming into a new community and creating relationships. How did that help you acclimate to the campus environment?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, my mom's main goal for me was to try and seek the best education possible. But unfortunately, in the community that I was in, that wasn't, accessible to me. So we had to go outside of our community. So my my glory to fame is that each year I would switch schools. Like I wouldn't stay in a school longer than 2 years, except for the stint out of high school. So what I learned to do is I had to communicate with people in different experiences and learn how to accept and respect everyone, no matter how long I knew them or what they appeared like. I had to learn to assert myself in different situations. So when I got to Notre Dame, while yes, it was a culture shock to actually continually live in a place that I wasn't used to, in a community I wasn't used to, what I found is that I was able to communicate and accept people based on just conversation and understanding, which is something that I realized not all of my classmates had. And I didn't understand what the struggle was, but it's something that I had to practice throughout the year. So when I came to Notre Dame, I always stood on that and tried to push that experience that I had, that thing that I learned, out into my community, because I felt like it really helped me embrace all of campus culture.
Yeah, although I'm sure that was hard as a teenager, probably switching schools all the time. Man, what skills and experience that gave you, right? You couldn't be in a shell. You had to reach out to others in order to meet people. So that's awesome. Corey, was it always a dream of yours to be a football player at Notre Dame?
Not exactly. So I grew up, my dad played basketball in San Antonio for a long time. So I come from a basketball family, and my younger brother plays for Duke, or he just graduated, he played for Coach K. So for us, it was always, basketball was a part of our lives, and I wanted to go play ball, but my best offer was like a junior college offer. And it was that or Notre Dame football. And I'm not the smartest person, but I could make that decision. But yeah, so basically what happened was, growing up, I played all these different sports, but I didn't see college on the horizon until my high school coach, Brandon Parrott, encouraged me to go to some camps and just say, hey, look, you're playing a small private school schedule. What if you just kind of test your mettle against the best players in the country? I think you're good. I think you can go play in college. It never once occurred to me. I went to a couple camps, and then shortly thereafter, I got a full ride offer from Notre Dame. And that's when the light bulb clicked for me. And I said, oh my goodness, I can go play college football. There's a whole new world opened up to me, but it wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for Coach Parrott pushing me and putting me in those positions to be successful.
Absolutely. And so, Corey, once you got here, what was your experience like in the dorm, in the classroom, and then you become the student body president? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, in hindsight, I feel like my experience was I guess a little unique in the sense of like I graduated high school in December. So I was one of 13 kids who enrolled early, and 5 of us were football guys. So we all roomed with each other, which was, it's uncommon for athletes to room with each other who come in, generally get assigned a random roommate. But I was rooming with football guys. So me and Steve Elmer, my roommate, we had the same schedule. We lived in Knott Hall. So that was a really easy transition in that sense, because we both had 5 a.m. wake up calls to go work out and that kind of stuff. But then by the time Frost Show, freshman orientation came around, I didn't know if I was a freshman or a sophomore. I was helping run Frost Show in my dorm for all the freshmen. And I was like, wait a second, am I an upperclassman? Am I a freshman? So I never really knew where I fit in that sense. And then, I got to do student body president, which I realized once again, not a lot of football guys did that. So there was one memory that really stood out to me was me, Deshaun Kaiser, Romeo Quara, all these guys on the team would go knock on dorms and ask people what they wanted, how we could help change campus. And I was walking back one night, it was like 1 a.m, the snow was on the dome, and I had to wake up in 4 hours to go work out and do winter workouts. And I looked at Scott Daly and my teammates, and I was like, man, like this is what Notre Dame's all about. This is it. The dome at midnight, with the snow, we're gonna go play football in 5 hours. We have class all day tomorrow. If this isn't Notre Dame, what is? But I feel like that's a pretty unique experience in hindsight.
Yeah, awesome. Corey, I'm gonna stay with you for this next question. In the past, you've mentioned that the impact that mentors have had on your life. Tell us a little more about that. Have you been mentored, and how has that helped in your formation and development?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, Coach Parra was a big part of my life as far as helping me realize, what I could accomplish. And when I got to campus, Mike Harity did that for me as well. And this is like the key thing, I think, for young students of color on campus that I learned when I was a student body president is, you have to be able to see it if you want to achieve it. And I didn't know that a student athlete could be a student body president. I just didn't know that was a possibility until Mike introduced me to Alex Kocha, who not only was a fencer and a student body president, but was a Rhodes Scholar. So Mike said, look, I think you're smart. I think you can be a Rhodes Scholar. I want you to apply. I had never even thought about it. And he said, go sit down with Alex Kocha. I'd love to introduce you. And Alex became a big mentor of mine, along with Mike. And both of them helped me on this whole journey it's been a wonderful journey. I was a Rhodes Scholar finalist and student body president. I tried to be like Alex. I couldn't do it. But if it wasn't for them in my life opening that door for me, I wouldn't have ever been able to pursue that. And I think that was the big thing that I learned when I was a student body president is I have to find and identify talented young people who were like me, students of color or students who may have been marginalized, and help give them that opportunity and that vision, because without the vision, it's hard to get there.
So true. That is so true. Indy, while you were a student athlete here, you tore your ACL, which can really shake, an athlete's identity when they have to be on the sideline for a little bit. How did you use your recovery time, and what did that experience teach you?
Right. So it's such an interesting question, because when I think about tearing my ACL, I think about who I was before that. And before that, I was very complacent. I had gotten into the routine of going to practice, completing the workout, and then being stagnant in my progress. But when I tore my ACL, things were taken from me. I wasn't able to walk. I wasn't able to be in my dorm by myself without getting help to the shower. So I really had to fight to break and regrow where I was. And what I learned there was an attitude of discipline and pushing myself beyond limits that I knew was possible. So after I tore my ACL, my athletic career took off, because then I knew how to train my body and how to commit to my mind, which is a skill that translated into how I have approached the social injustice movement and the community around me, because I had grown complacent to the way that conversations had acted, or the way that I had grown to be treated. And once I realized that it was possible to change that, which also came from my senior year project, where I did a documentary on my family, and I learned about their history and how my grandfather had to deal with the KKK, and how my mother had to deal with going down to the South, like when it was post segregated, but still they had to act and work a certain way. And what made them push me to be able to go to a majority white university, to be able to be on the sports team, was that they were never complacent. They kept fighting. So I took the discipline that I learned from my ACL, the knowledge of being able to do more from my documentary, and I merged it into things that I do currently today. Like, those lessons always stay with me and they keep pushing me, which is why I decided to create a podcast for people to learn and grow about the Black student athlete experience, which is why I have reached out to other student athletes to see what we can do better for them. And it's just interesting how sports is so in line with culture today. Excuse me for going on this small tangent, and then I'll throw it back on you. But one thing I have learned from this podcast is that the student athlete experience, and me and Corey kind of talked about this in our pre-meeting, is similar kind of to being a student of color, in that when people see your sweats or that you're on a varsity, they either decide that they like you, dislike you, or want to get to know you better. Same with a student of color. When you see my skin, do you like me, dislike me, or want to get to know me better? It's an interesting intersection of sports and life that I've kind of learned. So taking those lessons that I learned from athletics and applying them to life is the only most logical thing I could have came up with.
Absolutely. Being a former student athlete, nowhere near on the level that y'all were or are, it is those life lessons, right? That you learn on the court, in the practice, with the team, that set you up for success in life. You don't lose those. You learn how to organize. You learn how to schedule, make your schedule so it fits what's important. And you learn how to interact with people that are different from you every day for one common goal, which is, to win that championship or whatever it may be. So, all right. And I had to throw my little athlete stuff in there, from a long time ago.
An athlete, always an athlete, and don't take that from you.
Tell my body that. Kevin.
Yes.
So Kevin, a lot has changed here on campus and in the world since you were in school. When you were a student, you probably had hopes for future generations of student athletes of color. Tell us, what were those hopes, and how do you feel that the campus has changed for the students since you were a student here?
Well, that's a great question. Well, the first thing I noticed is the footprint has changed incredibly with regard to the buildings and the offerings that are there. It's just been stirring to me to note that. And last year, when I first moved here, I was invited, and I went to some meetings of the Wabruta group, which is a group of young African-American men. And, if I can be candid, I was kind of stirred that they were having some of the same questions I had decades previously. Some of the same frustrations that we were experiencing decades previously. But what I was heartened by was that this group had come together and was organizing to talk and to encourage each other. And they were seeking mentorship from the community as well, and to be involved in the community. So that, I thought, was terrific, because we were just kind of finding ourselves in the 70s. It was a time of upheaval, I think, for us culturally. And I think that we're not quite as awakened to all of the things that have been happening in recent years, and have been augmented by not only the onset of the pandemic, but as we've tried to navigate these issues of injustice and violence against people of color. So the thing that I would say to the community, the Notre Dame community, and we can all ask ourselves, we don't have to sit back and wait for the university to do something, but as you think about your Black brothers and sisters, and this is firmly rooted in my faith, is how can I love my brother today? How can I love my sister today? What can I do to make them feel welcome, as I would want to make the people that I love feel welcome? And then it becomes this less daunting task, that we don't have to convene committees and have all these initiatives. We just have that as part of our culture. And it begins with us individually, that we ask ourselves that question. I ask myself that question as a husband, as a father, as a citizen, as a worker. How can I love the people that I come in contact today? And how can I make them feel included? So if there was a suggestion that I would have for the university, is to see how we can incorporate that question on all levels of the university, be it administration and athletics and everything else. Indy, please.
Yeah. No, I was going to ask a follow-up question because I'm curious. You said that when you went to the Rebruder meeting, they were asking the same types of questions that you were asking at your time here. But then also at the beginning of the conversation, and this is something I'm trying to grapple with myself, you discussed how when Notre Dame won, you were like, this is Notre Dame. You had those feelings of love toward this community, but you see that there's still a portion of the community that is fighting for the right. So how can you balance that? How can it be in the same breath? It's so interesting to me.
It is a very interesting conundrum, when you think about it, because there are things, as I alluded to earlier, I was acculturated in a white world. So there are things that, there are questions I didn't ask, but the students that I was with asked those questions. Why aren't there things that are more acknowledging of our culture to make us feel included? Simple things like a barber, or a place to gather, or to talk, for us to be able to address and talk about these things, because we're not feeling included. We're missing the inclusion piece, because we hear the Notre Dame family, but what about me? And what about my role in the family, and where do I fit? So those are some of the questions that I was hearing that I didn't have necessarily because of how I was acculturated. So that was the difference, because I felt comfortable navigating these waters, and there were people that decidedly were not. But also, when I came in, Indy, I was a student first. I was not a highly recruited scholarship athlete. I tried out for the basketball team freshman year. I was told I made the team, but there were no spots. So then I had to go the next calendar year, played bookstore basketball. I made first team all bookstore. It was a big deal, the Observer. I'm like, Dad, look at this. I was first team all bookstore. And then I got a letter from Digger Phelps inviting me to be a part of the team. But what happened was the relationships I made as a student were augmented by when I became an athlete and I gained that profile.
Yeah.
And I also realized that I was no longer my own. I belonged to them.
What do you mean?
Because what I mean was there was a feeling, and maybe because you came on as an athlete, it was different, but what I had, and I saw Jeff Kohler was on, and some people from different residence halls. I'd met people in class and things like that. And with our friendships, they would say, "You're one of us." And then you become an athlete and people are like, "Wow, one of us is an athlete. This is part of our family." And so then I felt like I was representing all my relationships with my fellow students, not just the relationships I cultivated with my teammates or in the profile as an athlete with the general public, but as a Notre Dame person. So I realized I represented more than just myself or the profile of an athlete.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Kevin, because when I was thinking about my experience at Notre Dame, it all kind of comes down to my involvement as a Notre Dame athlete among athletes. I didn't think of myself as a football guy. You know, I thought of myself as I'm a student athlete here at Notre Dame. And my ticket into that kind of way of thinking was this concept called Irish on 3, which was like the athlete student government's version of like, you know, you go to an event, you get points for your team, and the team at the end of the year gets the most points, wins the, you know, the prize. And I would go to all these different sporting events, and I would meet all these different players and athletes, and I get to know them, build relationships with them, and then watch them perform at a high level. And it filled me with so much pride to be a part of that group, to be a part of the Monogram Club. And it was fascinating because there was no type of like in my mind, no distinction or anything. Like all of us, didn't matter where you came from. You know, I was friends with like European fencers. I was friends, you know, with people on my team who come from inner city. I was friends from like everybody. And we all saw ourselves as Notre Dame student athletes, as Fighting Irish. And that was like the coolest thing to kind of feel a part of that family. And when they succeeded, I felt like I succeeded. You know, when they won championships, I felt like I participated in that. So I think I understand what you're talking about. It's a really special thing. And then when I moved to student government, that feeling of family went from just the Monogram Club to the student body as well.
Yes.
I don't know if that was, no, sorry, Angie. I'm just, it's, I don't know if it's because I was a Olympic sport athlete, but I don't know if I necessarily felt that. I felt the community built out of, again, like we talked about, Corey, like you would take a class and it would almost feel like people didn't want to be with you because you were an athlete. So you had to be comfortable with being around other athletes. Like that's kind of where I built my camaraderie in my athleticship, because I felt so excluded when we made this class because there were assumptions about who I was, as I was not intelligent because I was the athlete in sweats, that I didn't care about school because I came in sweats, although people didn't realize I was just coming from practice or had to go to practice. So that's where I built my sense of community, in that exclusion from the student, like a lot of portions of the students that always kind of didn't embrace me because there was this air of like, oh, she's an athlete, she kind of feels like she's better than us, when I don't know. That's what was interesting to hear you guys have that experience. Is and did either of you ever experience that, or was it just me?
No, Indy, I think a lot of athletes and Black students have felt like that.
Okay.
I don't think that's unique. And at the same time, I think it's unfortunate, you know, that you would feel like that. And that goes back to the first thing. It's like, how could people have loved you differently and made you feel more included and more welcomed in doing that instead of making an assumption? But it also shows me, and I would like everybody that's watching to know, that one Black experience doesn't fit all.
Exactly. Yeah. That's so true, Kevin. That's the three of you here shows that the experience is different from everyone. The experience is different from even sports themselves. Indy sport track is different from football's experience or basketball's experience. So they won't have all the same, you know, experience. So great dialogue. And thank you all for sharing and being so vulnerable and open with your experience on this call. I want to switch a little bit to after Notre Dame and your careers. One of the things we hear from many employers is that they love hiring student athletes, that, you know, student athletes have mastered critical skills in the workforce, time management, you know, dedication, focus, teamwork, leadership, all of those things. Kevin, can you talk a little bit about how Notre Dame prepared you for the job market?
You know what is wonderful about the college experience, and especially about the Notre Dame experience, is it teaches you more than the academics and the class. It just taught me how to think and to examine things in greater depth and to expand my scope of vision. And I think that prepared me tremendously because when I got out, nobody asked me my GPA. They thought, oh, they sat up and they said, oh, Notre Dame? Oh, and so, but then that gets you in the door.
Right.
You have to show you have the goods once you're in the door. And so Notre Dame gave me the means to show that I have the goods by teaching me how to think, as I said, to expand my scope of vision, to be inquisitive, and to understand how to analyze and research and do those different things, and to be challenged by a lot of smart people that are asking good questions and challenging you in different ways. So in that respect, that I really appreciated what Notre Dame gave me, because I've been around people from other places that have graduated that are smart people. But I will tell you, for the last 6 months, since the beginning of June, after the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, I decided to convene a couple groups of classmates to have some love and justice roundtables. And the give and take, and Ann Giffels is on right now, and she's one of my classmates and been a collaborator on this, is that how smart and insightful the people are, my classmates, and how we challenge each other and we encourage each other, and they challenge me. So to be in the company of such intelligent and thoughtful people has been a real blessing that I didn't realize until recently, how deep a blessing that has been, and Notre Dame has been.
Thank you, Kevin. Indy and Corey, you both are early in your professional careers. What have your experiences been, and what career launch advice would you give to current students?
If I could just jump in, just one little to bookend Kevin's statement. I thought it was so interesting. The biggest takeaway, because of PLS majors, right? So shout out to philosophy here. But there was this one saying where the mark of an intelligent man, a mark of a wise man, is being able to entertain a thought without subscribing to it. And I think that's what Notre Dame, from an academic point, taught me, is that you have so many brilliant people with that heart and for service that Kevin was talking about, but they're also able to look at something for what it's worth and understand all sides of it without necessarily jumping to a conclusion or a judgment on it all the time. I'm not saying that it's 100% foolproof there, but I'm saying, generally speaking, I've noticed that Notre Dame alums are better at that than others, which I'm really grateful for. But from my own perspective, I think when I look at like what can people do today to help, like I said before, as far as mentorship, I tried to, when I was in a leadership position, to find people who had those abilities that I thought were really interesting, and then kind of show them that I believed in them and gave them the resources. And now, being a young alum, I've seen older alum do that for me, where they say, hey, we think you're talented, or we think that you have this opportunity. Have you thought about this? And then pushing me to serve in those community boards, or pushing me to apply for those jobs. Or in some cases, even opening the door themselves and saying, look, I'd love to hire you. So I think that's been kind of a double lesson for me. One, as a young person, don't be afraid to reach out to people that you admire, or your mentors, or people that are Notre Dame family members, and just say, hey, I'd love to learn more. Can I have 15 minutes on a phone call with you about your prospective career, because I'm interested? Or on the other hand, if you're in a position where you can hire people, then reach out to people that might be interesting to you and say, look, I want to give you an opportunity, or hey, I want to give you a shot to be successful, or at the very least, I'd love to have a conversation, and kind of, I read that you were interested in X. I'd love to introduce you to Y. Anything like that, I think would be really great. So that's kind of my perspective as a young alum.
That's awesome. Indy?
Yeah, just piggybacking off of what Corey said, the greatest thing that Notre Dame has taught me is that once you are a Notre Dame graduate, anything is possible. As corny as that sounds, it's the most truest thing to my heart, because you can be walking around campus, you can be in a room, and you'll see someone who has an experience, or a diversity of thought, or a diversity of skill set, who wants to allow you into their knowledge base, their education, what they have gone through. So piggybacking off the first question that you said, like, what has athletics taught me? Athletics has taught me to ask those questions, to be more open, to be disciplined, and to also be able to give an elevator pitch because when as athletes, we have a time schedule, but I still want to capitalize on everything that Notre Dame has to offer. So you have learned how to be more efficient with your time. So it's honestly a blessing to be here and experience that.
Well, I mean, one of the examples is when you took the time when you wanted to apply for our internship to allow us to do a mock interview with you, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the things that the student athletes, have to find time to do because they are so busy. They don't get the opportunities to interview for jobs as much. And just that one, mock interview can help you set you up, for a successful interview. I am not a, Notre Dame alum, but being here the past 4 years, when you say family here in Notre Dame, I mean, the alumni is all in. Like we are forever getting, which is a blessing asked from the alumni. How do we help? How can we help your student athletes, especially in this time where we're getting ready to move to, social injustice? How can we be involved? How can we help the student athletes? And I've been to many institutions and many organizations, and I have not seen it like it is here at Notre Dame. So I do want to, give that plug there. So
yeah, Angie, that's the best thing that I love about Notre Dame is why I feel so empowered to speak up, because what Corey was saying, the thing that Notre Dame has is the idea to I think about a thought without accepting it. So they're so willing to hear like other experiences and hear where they can be better and where they can improve, that feeling of wanting to do more for somebody who is a Notre Dame grad excites me, and I don't know if that's something that's passed from generation or not, but it's one of the greatest things about this university.
Tradition and history. Okay, so we're going to go into our last round of questions here before we open it up for questions from the audience real quick. So we can't have a discussion about the Black Domer experience as a student athlete without talking about touching on how some of the athletes have gotten involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. Football hosted the Juneteenth March. They're involved in the Stand Together commitment that, I oversee. Indy has done her Brave Voices podcast. How have each of you used your voices to activate social change? And maybe we'll start with Indy, just because especially with the Brave Voices, how you got there.
Yeah, so how I got there is actually an interesting story. When quarantine first hit and everyone was at home, I think that's when we saw the rise of, the most speaking out about social reform. And Angie, you know this, I reached out to you. The biggest qualm that I have is I needed someone to talk to. It's almost as like an African, as a Black person, all those feelings that everybody wants to talk about now, and you're in a room of majority white people and they look to you as a way to teach and express, like where can you process that? Where can you live with that mental health? So I started to think about what about my brothers and sisters who are athletes? How are they feeling? I don't want them to feel how I felt. So I started this podcast with the original idea of just letting them come on and talk about their experience, to be heard, to be acknowledged, and then as my way, as a form of restorative justice, to begin to heal. But what I learned as I continued to go through the process is that this platform then became the tool for teaching that I so felt most uncomfortable with in the meetings, because now I get to just talk and have this form of restorative justice with my brothers and sisters, and anyone can listen in and understand where we're coming from. So that's kind of where it started and where it evolved into. And I've just learned so much about these Black students and what they've gone through and their personal experiences. And it's really it incited me to see how the athletic department has stood behind me and wanted to push this and want us to be better. So that's just kind of been my overarching thing. I've never been a vocal person. I've never wanted to do a podcast, but I felt it was necessary. And I knew Notre Dame would support that. So that's just kind of where I am in my process.
Thank you, Indy. And you're right. Even though it was restorative for you, it's so educational for our community, right? And the student athletes are able to tell it without having to worry about what people might think or say. They could just be themselves and share their experience. Kevin.
Oh boy. Well, first thing, Indy and Corey, I wish my late father was here, because he would be so proud. and excuse me for getting emotional, but I'm proud to be in your company. And he would be so proud to see two such fine Notre Dame people. So I just want to let you know that, and I didn't want to let this moment pass. And excuse me, folks, but I cry at the drop of a pin. My heart comes out through my eyes. So anyway.
I'm super stoked to be on the same panel as you, Kevin. Thank
Kevin,
you.
I know.
It's sweat. It's sweat. That's all.
So, you know what? I think what I'll tell you all is I looked at stuff and I looked at what broke my heart. And what broke my heart was that there are children that don't know how to read. What breaks my heart is there are children that are hungry. And so how can I not do something about that? And so that is what we've done, and it was a dream of mine for years, is to start the Hawkins Family Foundation as a nonprofit to promote literacy and to fight hunger. And so we started, we're allied with one school here in South Bend, and we started a reading program once a week where we use comic books and superheroes as a genre to promote a love of reading. And that is my heart. If folks that have known me a long time know I am a complete comic and superhero nerd, but it also was the vehicle through which I started to grow my love of reading. And so we said, we're going to do this. We're going to take it out of the ether and we're going to do something. And this is the beauty of the Notre Dame family. I called one of my classmates, Tom Lang, who's in Dillon Hall with Bob Cronin and Jeff Kohler, who are on this call. And he was involved with the law school. And he said, Hawk, I don't practice law in Indiana, but one of my Notre Dame Law School classmates practices law, and I'm going to hook you up with him. Well, I went to his office and he said, Hawk, I love your plan. I love your plan so much that I'm going to file your 501c3 paperwork pro bono.
Aww.
And I'm also going to pay for it. And I'm also going to be your first donor. That's the beauty of the Notre Dame family. And so that was how we got started. And we read with kids. We actually help them create comic books. So we read, we write stories, and we draw. And right now our challenge is to transition from in-person to doing it in the age of COVID. So what we've done is pivot. And the school called me this summer. They said, we have, of the 300 kids in this school, we have 280 kids that are on free and reduced lunch, and they don't have food on the weekends. Can you help us? So this is, again, the beauty of the Notre Dame family. I just did a passive thing on our website, and I told folks I wanted to raise $40,000, and this was in September, to feed kids. We've got $30,000, and most of that from the Notre Dame community. Wow. It's been amazing, the heart of the Notre Dame community for this, and people believing in that. So it's, but what I would say to folks, if you want to be involved and walk with our foundation and do things, that's wonderful. We welcome you, but we know you don't live in South Bend. There are kids that don't know how to read where you live. There are kids that are hungry where you live. Love those children. And if you're not sure how to start, we will do it. We will help you. I will come to you. I will get on a Zoom with you. We will do whatever to help you figure out how to love the children where you are. And I think that's what'll make a difference. And yes, we have kids of color. We have Hispanic kids. We have poor white kids. All those kids need love. Broken families, home insecurity, food insecurity, all of those things. We just I get up every morning and how can I love these people today? And that would be my challenge to you all as you're watching today, is figure out what breaks your heart. And there are different places. Some people get broken, hearts are broken by legislation or government issues or policing issues or inequities in different areas. Figure out what breaks your heart and do something. Do not sit back and wait for elected officials to fix your community.
Thank you, Kevin. Drops the mic. Dang, okay. Sorry, Corey. No, just joking.
I'm used to having to follow tough acts. You know, I have to follow my dad most of the time. So I mean, that's a hard one to follow. I'll try my best, but you know, I serve on the Young Alumni Board and the Alumni Association, and like Kevin said, you know, where are you now, and what are the immediate needs in front of you, and what breaks your heart? And I think my frustration early on, not just this year with what happened this summer, but just generally, is where do you start? You know, it's just, I feel like sometimes it's overwhelming, and that, like Kevin said too, he goes to Abruta and they're still asking the same questions he did decades earlier, and it's just, sometimes it feels like there's no progress, or progress isn't fast enough. So but what I find very helpful is just start where you are and do what you can, and never look back. So for me, you know, I have a position where I'm the diversity and inclusion officer on the Young Alumni Board for the Alumni Association. You know, that's where I'm at, and that is my kind of my workshop, if you will. So, you know, our team had this idea: what if we do the Black Domers? And Amy Porter, who was the chair, had this awesome idea. And now, you know, it's this whole thing where we're having this conversation right now. But it was born out of a need that, what can we do as a Young Alumni Board or as an affinity group or the Alumni Association to respond to what happened this summer in a tangible way, you know, like, and understanding our limitations and what we can do as far as our capacities. Like, we can't pass legislation. We're an alumni board, you know, like we can't, you know, as far as like start a curriculum, like we can't do that. That's outside of our scope. But what is in our scope is facilitate conversations for alumni of color to be heard, to share their story, to inspire the next generation of leaders, to invite members of the Notre Dame family who may not experience what they did, but invite them to participate and heal together and move forward and demand change together as a united front. That's what we can do. And that's what we've tried to do. And I just want to encourage anyone out there is look where you are and just say, what can I do today? As Kevin's saying, how can I love someone today? And if you're an employer, go hire people of color. You know, if you're a teacher, continue to teach students, you know, and continue to give them love. If you're a parent, you know, try to teach your kids about these things. Like, you can, no impact is small, you know, it's all huge because it's a domino effect. And Kevin's love for those children will then have ripple effects for a long way to go. Indy's Brave Voices podcast is going to have a lot larger effect than just two people in a room talking, you know? So just don't discount the impact you can have if you're driven by that love and that heart to serve, because God can take that and multiply.
Yep, absolutely. Well, you did pretty well there, Corey. So
hey, beginner's luck.
Yeah, I get out of here. Okay, so we have about 4 minutes left, and so I'm going to try to jump to questions real quick. That I think we got a couple in here. Mary, is it okay to ask some of these questions in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Kevin, the question says, I have read that your Indian experience was enhanced by a year of not being a Notre Dame athlete. Would you expound on this?
Well, when I came in, I was just Kevin Hawkins, student. And Kevin Hawkins came in and he made friends just being who he was. Mm-hmm. Not Kevin Hawkins who's on the basketball team and people look at you with a different eye. It's just, this is Hawk, you know, and who am I? Who am I going to be to other people? And so I just developed camaraderies and relationships and friendships with people with just a simple dynamic of us talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And I thought that there's a beautiful simplicity to that dynamic, and I think there always is. You have as long as you're interested in cultivating a relationship, because I think it was good because people didn't want to be around me because I was something else. If they wanted to be around me, was because of me and how they felt about me, not the fact that I was an athlete and I had a certain profile and it might look good on them to be friends with an athlete. It was, they wanted to be friends with me because of who I was as a human being. So that's what's enhanced it. And then, that also made me approachable to people, because sometimes people don't know how to approach student athletes because they're not in the fraternity. And so that also, I think, made me more approachable to people after I became a student athlete.
Okay. Mary, should I do one more, or what do you think? We're coming up on time a little bit.
I think you can do one more.
Okay. Let's see here. So many African American alums bristle when asked if they were athletes, as if they were the only one. Wait a minute, I'm sorry about this. As if they were the only way one might be recruited to Notre Dame. Contrast the experience of alums of color and African American student athletes.
Yeah, I can take this one. It's funny because I've heard that a lot where, like just a normal Black student on campus will just be walking around and someone will say, hey, what team do you play for? How insulting that would be to their intelligence. Like, wait, you don't think I'm smart enough to get in normally? And it's funny because student athletes, at least in my experience, I felt the same thing where I'm a football player at Notre Dame and I go to a class and other students, and not just like random people or fans, other students or professors might look at me and say, how did you get in here? Like, why are you? There's been no football players who, are Dean's List or whatever in our classes. Like, why are you in this class? How did you get in? And then that is a front that I think is kind of similar. It's not the same, obviously, but it is interesting to see that, it just takes different shapes. So, but the thing that was interesting in my experience is that wasn't, and as Indy mentioned before, in my experience, it wasn't just a Black student athlete thing. It was like my teammates who were white football players. They also got the same treatment of how did you get into this Mendoza class? You're like, there's no way you're smart enough, to be here. So I thought that was interesting where it was colorblind when it came to football players, but Black students felt that way when asked, do they play a sport?
Corey, I would even add, as an administrator, I always get the question, what team do you coach? As if the only way that I could be a part of a collegiate or program is that I'm coaching a team. If I say I work in athletics, but what team do you coach? I'm like, no, I'm actually an administrator. So yeah, it's very interesting. So, well, it's 2:00 and I really want to thank you all so much for your time. I've learned so much from all of you. I hope our listeners have as well. I definitely want to stay in touch with, Indy, I see you all the time, but Kevin and Corey, yeah, we need to hook up. So, but thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you so much. I hope you've learned something today and appreciate your time. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Mary. Thank you,
Kevin,
Leah.
I'll be in touch.
Please do.
I want to volunteer. I want to volunteer and help.